Welcome back to the Eagleless Podcast. I have somebody who's actually truly incredible. I met him on LinkedIn and then started following his keynote speeches at the TEDx event. I've got Dr. Tarek with me, and he is the mind guy. Now, break that down for me. What is the mind guy? 'Cause, I mean, I know what I've seen, but what is it to you?
All right. Okay. Well, Jake, it's amazing to be here with you. The Mind Guy is a short colloquialism, really, to help people understand a little bit about my lens on life from my professional background. I'm a psychiatrist, but when you hear psychiatrist, that means different things to different people. Sometimes that means psychologist, sometimes that means psychiatrist, it means doctor, it means hospital, it means different things to different people, and sometimes people just don't know. And sometimes if I just say Mind Guy, that gives people a bit more of a real world handle on something of what I might be about.
No, it's so funny. I hear a joke comes to my mind. It says when people get rich, on at all times on the left they have their lawyer, and on the right they've got their psychiatrist. Because it's like everybody thinks that money's going to make them happy. Of course, everybody wants to find out for themselves, but I know in my life is once I've reached a point, I'm like, okay, so what's the point? And that's one of my biggest messages to people. It's like, you always should make as much money as you can, but it's not going to fulfill all those things. So if you're not fulfilled now, you're not going to be fulfilled in the future.
Jake, that makes a lot of sense. And isn't it true that in your life and my life, we see people on that pursuit of happiness, and money is a big part of it.
Oh, yeah.
But money isn't necessarily the end point. I often say that you're only rich when you possess something that money can't buy.
That's the truth right there. So tell me, what areas do you help people in?
Well, everything that I teach and coach and help people with is founded in the MAP blueprint. I call it the MAP blueprint, Mind, Action, Profit. And that is to say that there is a connection between what goes on in your mind, between the ears, the actions that you take, and therefore the results that you get. Now, when I talk about profit, often people think about money, right? Because that's just the top of mind thought when you hear the word profit.
Exactly.
But if you go dig up the Latin word for profit, it's perfectus. And that word translates into progress. And I thought, hey, this is really fascinating, because actually, in a sense, we're all in hunt of profit. We're all in pursuit of profit. It's just that we're in pursuit of profit in different areas of our life. For some of us, we're in pursuit of profit in our happiness, or it's our inner peace, or it's our intellect. It's maybe our relationships. It's our joy levels. It's our finances, right? That's monetary profit. But there's also free time, there's hobbies, there's contribution, and the list goes on. And the point here is that when we start to understand the connection between the mind and how you think, how you take action, and when you optimize your mind and actions, you optimize your results, you optimize the progress that you get. But what's really interesting is that there's an interconnectedness between these three items in this blueprint, between the behaviors that you take. I mean, like, for example, like if you go and get on the bench in the gym and you're pumping your personal best, right? That's an action. How do you feel? How do you feel when we hit personal best?
You feel amazing.
So what is that? There's a connection there between action and then your state of mind. It's not to say that everything begins in the mind and then leads to action. That is true in part, but there's also a converse side to that coin as well. But ultimately, the results that we get in life are connected to how we think and how we take action. And the results we get also have a feedback effect on, again, how we think, how we take action. So everything I help people with is based on that blueprint. And although I'm a doctor, I've had 20 years in the field of medicine. I've specialized in psychiatry, and I work in the illness framework as a doctor. As Dr. T, I'm in the wellness framework. So I'm not delivering medical advice. I'm actually delivering high performance coaching, which is all about how do you take your game from great to a whole lot greater. I mean, that's kind of like a human hunger. People just want to improve, right?
they'll put needles in themselves to make them improve at something.
Indeed.
Just have, and that's my next question is, you've got some stuff on the internet, some videos and things like that. But, kind of even when I talk to people about investing, and I'm not an investing coach at all, but they only feel like they can invest if they have a certain amount of money. And same thing too when it comes to like, oh, well, I've got to be a high achiever. Does somebody have to be a high achiever to be following you right now and to be listening to the content that you're putting out? Because somebody might not see themselves as a high achiever. I know I look back in my life when I was 20 and I was homeless and I was living in my car. There's things that I didn't do because I didn't feel like I deserve them. Oh, that's just for those people. Maybe those people who went to college, or those people who are, who are successful. So could your stuff help out people who is not just a high achiever as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my strap lines is that you're amazing and that there's treasure in you. And the reason I repeat that over and over again is because I believe that. I believe that about you, Jake. I believe that about the audience that are listening in. I believe that about created beings who are here on this earth, that there's something amazing and that there's treasure within them. And so, this idea of high achiever, again, that means different things to different people. And, a question is, where's the line? How do you measure it? What's the metric?
I think our high achievers are, they're committing suicide. I mean, you look at like, these people who are famous and they're committing suicide, so they can't be there. There's a mess up between that line of what's actually a high achiever and what's truly a high achiever. So I mean to keep, cut you off, but you keep going with that.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a really important point, and in our chat before this call, we're talking about this concept of eudaimonia and hedonia, and I think people are familiar with this idea of hedonia. Hedonia is that dopamine kick that I get, that happiness hit. It's when I have the ice cream or bite into that chocolate or listen to a stand-up comedian, I feel happy. And our brains are wired to experience that kind of joy. Kick, that joy impulse, and that's a good thing. It's healthy for us, but it's not the full picture. I think what we're talking about is the importance of eudaimonia, this sense of deep meaning, purpose, value, my why. Like, I count, don't I? And a belief in that. And where there is a high level of eudaimonia in combination with hedonia, with that joy, then you've got a really nice mix. I call that the golden quadrant. I break that graph into 4 quadrants. Golden quadrant is really where you want to be in life, in work, in relationships, all that kind of stuff. And I think that you can have 7, 8, 9 figures in the bank, but you don't have the eudaimonia. You don't have that sense of like, I'm here for a reason. I'm confident about who I'm here to serve. If that's unclear, then the zeros in the bank are great. It can be an amplifier of who you are, but if you don't know who you are, you're stuck, right?
Exactly.
And so you can be rich and unfulfilled. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely.
I've been doing some, different studies about like when you drink energy drinks, like it can, they were saying that it can, wear out your adrenal glands. I don't know that that's even true, but can people, as I've been listening to, the way that the mind works, is it hedonia? The
Hedonia. Yeah.
So hedonia, can people like, suicide rates, depression, everything's rising because of that. Is that a thing where, when people are looking for the instant gratification, the dopamine hits to where it really gets, worn out to where that's, they can never be truly fulfilled.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You see that on a small and trivial day-to-day life scale, and you also see that in a very severe case as well, don't you? So like in terms of like everyday life, we're scrolling through social media. That is full of dopamine reward circuit stimulation. Your mesolimbic pathway in your brain is being lit up. How many likes do I have? And did someone give me a comment? And what's new? All that kind of stuff. And we always want more. I mean, I think that we have a hunger to grow. We have a hunger for more. But when that's misplaced, that can lead us down an infinite rabbit trail of consuming and consuming and consuming and consuming. We never really fulfill that deep hunger within ourselves. But then if we think about how this can be a bit more serious, we're talking about addiction. We're talking about, misuse of medication, misuse of drugs. We're talking about really about bad habits that become chains on our life. And both of these extremes are not really what we've been designed for. At least I can't see freedom in that.
Yeah.
We're in pursuit of freedom. And I think, yeah, absolutely. You can wear it out because, it's just not enough. 2 sugars in my tea is not enough. I need 3. Now I need 4. Now I need 5. And you can translate that into the more toxic examples in life as well.
I'm hearing stories about people, they don't get a certain amount of likes, and these girls will take their thing off Instagram because they don't get enough likes. And that to me is just like, man, that would be such a, a sad way to live, to where I'm based off of what, the likes that I get online.
It can get addictive, can't it? If you aren't aware of that slippery slope you might be getting on, then it can be addictive. I know it happened to me. This is a trivial example, but when I got my first TED talk out, a TEDx talk rather, when it was on YouTube, I kept on checking it for the number of views. I knew what was happening to me, and then I did crazy stuff. This is some years back when I was starting to divide, the number of views over a 24-hour period and starting to calculate the rate of likes or the rate of views that were coming through. And then I could start to feel my sense of happiness, fulfillment, and purpose starting to be affected by a metric. And because it didn't become an addiction, because I didn't sort of let that grow arms and legs, it didn't become a problem, and I was able to detox. But it's addictive, isn't it? I mean,
it is. Yeah, same thing happened to me too. We understand that now. When you look at the world on a grand scale right now, of all the stuff going on, it just seems that people are just longing for a purpose, even if it doesn't make sense. It's like, that's the dumbest thing that I could ever see a group of, people doing. Why as a society do you feel like we're going that route, to where people are just, I feel like are not taking any self-worth? They're just kind of going towards these, groups of people. Is it a lack of identity? Or is it a lack of like self-purpose? Because you look at these, these groups of people, and what they're doing doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And not just labeling one group out, but just why are we as a society so, people are just mobbing up into these groups that don't make any sense?
Yeah, herd behavior is, it's a fascinating concept, and we're wired to travel in packs. I mean, evolutionarily speaking, we find it a much safer concept to be banded together, that there's strength in numbers, than to be the rogue that goes, goes it alone. And so, it's not a bad thing. It's a great thing in a sense that, we're wired for community. Like, our brain literally has part of its basal metabolic rate, part of its like baseline energy consumption is concerned with hunting for meaningful connections and relationships. We're social animals. We like to be in community. And so there's a sense of safety there. There's a sense of belonging. There's a sense of comfort. There's a sense of all that kind of good stuff that we maybe used to experience in the school playground with our friends. And so that's innately in us. We like the idea of tribe. We like the idea of family. And there's all that kind of good stuff. Combine that with a very scary set of circumstances, when there's lots of restriction, when there's lots of change, uncertainty, and threat. I call it the R-cut. Lots of that going on. And of course there is. This year has been off the scale crazy with COVID.
Yeah.
We start to amplify behavior. Some of it's fear-driven. Some of it's just basic need-driven. And so we'll do the things that are innately natural to us.
So kind of going back on that, like, would you say, you said comes, what's natural to us? Because I know that there's different parts of the brain, but for more of like the fight or flight kind of, mentality, to where it's almost just like all reasoning is out the window. When
you talk about fight flight, you're absolutely right. This is in the emotional processing bit of us, deeply buried in the brain. Your amygdala, you'll have heard of that, is your fight or flight center. It's actually fight, flight, freeze, flop, or drop. There are a few different responses we can have when we are activated in that way.
Yep.
This top deck up here, this is a lot more about rational thought, decision making, problem solving, choices, personality, all that kind of good stuff. And it's absolutely true that we need both of these to have a normal functioning human life. Up here is all robot, here is emotional wreck. We need a little bit of both, so we're human. And so, when we are under threat, one of the first things to go offline is rational thinking.
We really are kind of part robot almost, right? Because our brain is, figuring out, all right, how do we automate, this process to where we don't have to really, think about that. Like, break that down for me like a little bit on like how that even works.
Jake, I've never heard it put that way, the way you just put it, but it's so apt. You're kind of almost likening the brain to AI or, systemized thinking. Never thought of it like that until now. You're absolutely right. It's what we call cognitive biases.
Well, yeah, and
You
so
know?
I want to go into those cognitive biases is because I feel like for example, when I'd be on the highway, right, and somebody would cut me off, and I wouldn't get that mad. I'd be like, all right, no big deal. They might not have seen me or anything like that. But so say vice versa is I accidentally cut somebody off and they just go absolutely ballistic, to where it's like if they would have known that like, hey, my mirror was, decided I didn't see them and I'm a good person and all this stuff. Like they don't, at that point that they don't care. They just, they're flipping you off. And, I would get just so mad that they would do that. Cause like, I wouldn't do that. But then when I took myself out of the equation to where it's like, and that's really what Egoless is all about, is like, what, I don't know what's going on. And just because, the event that I accidentally, cut them off or something like that, triggered a lot of things going on in their own life that has nothing to do with me. They're not actually mad at me. They're just mad at, life in general. And that was just an opportunity to spill out. And so with those cognitive biases, talk to me about what it really is.
Well, your brain is loaded with circuitry that has been shaped over time through your experiences. I mean, we learn laws of life and laws about the world. As we grow up, we kind of input that data and we kind of go about life. And then sometimes that data has to change over time. So when you're young, you think, oh, a table has 4 legs. And then you come across a 3-legged table. And then your brain has to kind of like reshape that data and go, okay, so tables can have 4 legs or 3 legs, and then you come across a different kind of table, which is some kind of like modern art table, which has no legs whatsoever. It's just a dome. And so now a table can be a flat surface with 3 legs, 4 legs, or a dome. And so your brain's always adapting and it's trying to create new schemas and new laws of life. However, to try and take the legwork out of your everyday thinking so that you can preserve your cognitive bandwidth for the things that matter, you have an autopilot. You have an autopilot trying to run the show. Like you and I right now, we're very conscious of each other. We're having conversation, but neither of us are really thinking about where we're placing our feet. Like we're just, now we are.
Now I'm thinking about it.
now, and so is everyone who's listening, right?
Yes.
But before, that was autopilot. That was all, most of our thinking is actually in the unconscious realm. It's in autopilot. And autopilot is great, but sometimes autopilot lands you up at answers that are different from a conclusion that you would have arrived at if you had thought more analytically. So when the guy cuts you off on the road, or let's say you accidentally cut them off on the road, the guy that's been cut off could have a very emotional limbic response, like, like, how dare you?
Yeah.
Or he could go, before I react, hang on a sec, is there a mother in the car that's about to give birth that guy's rushing them to? Are they going through a hard time? Did they just not see me? There are other explanations. There are other ways to view the statue. And in so doing, when you maintain that position, this is emotional intelligence we're talking about, Jake. When you maintain that emotionally intelligent position, whereby, hang on, there's more than one way to see this.
So you got autopilot, and then what do you call that when you self-aware intent, but what do you call that when you're like, all right, I'm in this situation, but I'm not on autopilot? What is that? What do you call that?
It's called a mentalized stance.
Okay, a mentalized stance.
Yeah, or a stance of mentalization. So, when we're doing coaching with CEOs, ambitious MDs, folk that are running the show where there's a lot of pressure, a lot of decisions to be made, a lot of people around the table, all that kind of stuff, it's so important to maintain a mentalized stance, to get back into the penthouse of your brain, get up there, to get into the elevator and get into the penthouse of the brain. So I start to see things rationally. Oh, okay, so we got a problem here. Let's cut this up in a very logical way and analyze it in a very rational and systematic way, rather than an emotionally driven way where we're more likely to make a mistake.
Now, so how does somebody get into the mentalized stance? Because I feel like that's not a common thing in people. It's just they're on autopilot so much. And I'll get into that, asking you about that here in a second. But how does somebody get into a mentalized stance?
There are lots of techniques that you want to practice all of these, not just some of them, but all of these all the time, as much as you can, to improve your ability to mentalize in a position, in a moment, to have a kind of a penthouse view of your situation. And so, you know, it's a bit like getting off the busy road and into the helicopter, so you change your perspective. One important way is to understand that cognitive biases exist. When you understand that they exist and how they operate, then you're more aware. It's kind of like think twice, cut once. All right. If I understand that if I just like cut, I'm more likely to make a mistake compared to when I think twice and cut once. You know, the famous book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel Kahneman gives a great example of if a bat and a ball costs £1 or $1.10, and the bat costs $1 more than the ball costs, how much does the ball cost? I and most other people say 10 cents.
That's what I would have said.
Yeah, because like your brain is making decisions quickly with what it knows and how it knows to answer, and then it just steps into the trap door. So if we apply the answer into the equation back to front and see if it meets the standard or not. So let's just say the ball costs 10 cents. And if the bat costs $1 more than the ball costs, the bat therefore the right answer is 5 cents. Now, if we understand that reality is not always as we think it is, as we are perceiving it, if we just understand that weakness in our thinking, this allows you to become more self-aware. It allows you to think twice and cut once.
So and I feel like that's the, you know, if you look at things in steps, if people like, you know, looking, all right, how do I get somewhere? Being, you know, firmly, you know, faith, and, you know, the Bible says, you know, whatever you seek, you're going to find. If you seek truth, you know, we're drawn to it. I mean, I've got some different worldviews when it comes to that, and we won't get into that because it's a totally separate subject. But it really does correlate with that, to where it's just like, all right, if you just understand that, you know, how you see the world, you know, may not be true, and you're open, I feel like that's step one. Would you say that?
Yeah, for sure. So when I talk about cognitive biases, I talk about the 4 worlds of cognitive biases. Do you want me to tell you what those worlds are real quick?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay, so the first mode, I call it the cherry picker mode. The cherry picker mode is your brain's natural tendency to simply pick certain bits of information amongst a sea of information. When there's too much information, when there's data overwhelm, your brain just wants to hunt. I don't know about you, but I'm a bullet point thinker. Like if someone sends me a 20-page email, I'm just going to scan for like, what's the bottom line?
What's the point?
Right?
Okay, we wouldn't make good lawyers.
Right, and that's the shadow side.
Yep.
to cherry picking. Here's an example of a cherry picker bias. It's called the availability bias. The availability bias is your mind's unconscious tendency to overestimate the probability of something happening just because you're reading about it everywhere. It's available to you. Yeah. For example, when 9/11 happened, if you look at the statistics of you know, what was reported in the media at the time and how well represented each of those items were in terms of, say, for example, cause of death. Okay, you know, leading causes of death were much more underreported, say like heart disease and cancer, compared to terrorism. Terrorism was just overreported. But what were we more afraid of when it was reported everywhere?
Terrorism.
We're more afraid of, you know, terrorism. Is it safe to fly? You know, is it safe to catch a train? Should I stay indoors? Are they safe to speak to? And whatever. And that's the perfect example of availability bias, because your brain is starting to overestimate the probability.
You know what it reminds me of too, just like saying that, like someone studied the availability bias. One of his quotes was, if you tell a lie big enough, loud enough, and long enough, people are going to believe it.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And so, yeah, part of that, targeted advertising, you start to see, like, literally you are having a higher influx of those types of adverts that appeal to you than would be normal. But also the availability bias then compounds it in your own mind. And so, absolutely, again, just knowing that the availability bias exists allows you then to ask the question, am I favoring this option just because I'm seeing it everywhere? Am I responding to this option just because everyone's talking about it? Or is this actually a rational decision? To know that your mind and my mind has a cherry picker tendency, and remember, your brain's trying to help you out when there's too much information, and there is. Right now, there's just too much. Like my phone's pinging and blinging, and we're getting alerts and emails and calls, and the list goes on. Your brain, your bandwidth cannot cope with it. It has to cherry pick what it thinks is important, or what it stands out because it's bizarre, or because it's funny, or because it's shocking, or because it's available, blah, 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 blah. So just to ask yourself the question, hey, am I making a decision because my brain's in cherry picker mode? Like, the magic question would be, have I evaluated all of the information available to me? And when there's just way too much, we'll cherry pick, and I'll do that on a really long email.
On every single day on Spotify, 40,000 new songs are released. And I work with some different artists to like help them grow their brand. But if you're looking at 40,000, if you imagine like in a room full of, 40,000 snowflakes and they suspended animation, it's like, and you can only pick 8, how would you choose those snowflakes? And that's really what life is like. All this stuff's going around. It's like you can only pick some. So, how do we, and when we're in cherry picker mode, how does our brain determine what we pick? Our
brains will notice certain things based on how different they are to the rest. So the contrast effect, for example. Okay. So if you painted one of those snowflakes red, suddenly your eyes go to that one, right? Out of all the snowflakes you paint that red, suddenly there's contrast, there's a difference. Your brain also notices change. I was walking a route to and from work when I used to live in the city, in Aberdeen. I live outside the city now. I walk that route to and from work. I drive that route to and from work frequently. I only noticed a building that was on that route that I passed every single day after it was getting demolished. Like after there was a change. I had my eyes wide open, but at the same time, I was kind of blind to it. But what my brain noticed was the change. It's like, oh, hang on a sec. There always used to be like a big wall there, and now I'm seeing light come through. What's that? So, our brains will notice change. And by the way, this is great stuff for marketers because they're constantly looking for ways to cut through the noise. We'll notice bizarre. We'll notice things that are funny. We will notice things that are placed before us. That's called the bias of mere exposure. So just because I see a hamburger on this bus stall, and I see a hamburger on that LCD screen, and I see a hamburger on that flyer, because it's just merely exposed. There have been various neuroeconomic studies to show that where you place items in a shop can change buying behavior. This is mere exposure, place items beside a till, or, where people walk in versus to where it's harder to get to or harder to see. Mere exposure, we favor things that we can see, that we notice. And I mentioned the availability bias as well. To understand what pops through into conscious attention is interesting. But then as a recipient, it's also interesting to know, hey, am I paying attention to this because I want to and because it's right, or because my mind is being fooled a little bit?
And so, okay, so I know we're going, and I want to make sure you get through those 4. So we got the first one is cherry picker, and then the
cherry picker is the inventor. The inventor is about when there's just not enough data available. When the full picture isn't there, our brain tends to fill in the blanks. A nice example is bandwagon bias. I think we can all appreciate this. So if you have 2 videos of me, and one has 7 views, and the other one has 70,000 views, which are you more likely to click first?
70,000.
Because what does our brain assume? Our brain's filling in the blanks. It's like we haven't been given a full sort of critique on both of these videos, which is better, which is not, and there's to be no 5-star review or anything like that. Just a number, and so your brain fills in the blank. Oh, 70,000 means what? That video must be what? Yeah. It's got to be better. It's got to be better. It's got to be higher value to me. And so we go do what what other people are doing. This is bandwagon bias. A few months ago, I took my little girl to the cinema, and obviously it was a few months ago because it was all pre-COVID and all that kind of stuff. So we go to the cinema, and there are 2 queues at the popcorn stand, and one queue was like 15 people long, and there was another queue which I think had 1 person there. Which queue did people continually join?
The long line.
The 15. Yeah, that's it. It's bandwagon, right? Because we don't ask ourselves the question, hang on a sec, Do we have all the information available to us? I mean, our minds are unconsciously making a preference here, and an assumption. We're feeling like, well, this must be the right cue. And now we're coming full circle to your original comment about groups and people clumping together, and how we can sometimes lose our rational thinking in groups, because sometimes just being together is what I need. And so if we combine the bandwagon bias that can be at work in people's minds, particularly if we're stressed and just not thinking things through, is that we're basically just doing it because everyone else is doing it. We haven't even stopped to think, why are we doing this, right? Like, why are we not doing this? Well, because everyone else is, right?
All right. So we got the cherry picker mode. We've got the inventor. What's number 3?
Yeah, I call it the fast assumer, and it's our tendency to prefer things or assume options are better without thinking them through.
I assume you meant this. That's why I tell people, one of my quotes is that, assuming makes an ass out of me and you. Like when I assume.
Yeah. I've heard that too. I've heard that too.
I assumed. It's like, wait, what? Why would you assume? Like that doesn't, I just assumed. I can't think of how many times I've heard it. I just assumed you didn't want that. It's like, don't assume that.
Yeah, right. And I remember, I think you're the only other person that I've spoken to that's aware of that phrase or that meme about, when you assume, it makes an ass out of you and me. When I was a medical student, when I was a training doctor, we had to go on ward placements. That's how we learned. We would go to gastrointestinal ward or the cardiothoracic specialty ward, and we would learn on these wards, and we had to, as junior doctors, learn to take histories. We had to learn to ask the right questions in the right order from patients, so we build information in our head so we could start to make the right decisions for patients. That's what we learned. But when we were baby doctors, of course, we'd be, we're in training mode and we don't always get things right. And I remember a time whereby, we'd all taken histories, we'd taken stories, reports back from patients, and come back to report to the consultant in charge. And so the consultant in charge was having us sort of stand up in front of them and give the report of what we had ascertained. And anyway, I remember my fellow classmate giving a report on the history that they collected. And so the consultant in charge said, and what about anemia? Do they have anemia? It's like, I don't think they have anemia. Oh, did you ask if they had anemia? No, I didn't ask if they had anemia. I just assumed they didn't have anemia. And then he just went really quiet, and then he just wrote a word out, and then he turned it around and it had the word assume, and he had broke it up, and he said, every time you assume, it makes an ass out of you and me. And I'd only ever seen it once, but it stuck. It really, really drilled into my memory. And you're the only part of the person that I've met that's been able to say the same story.
It's so funny as you just said that. I didn't realize that it was ASS, you, and then me. I just heard the quotes and I just put it together. Kind of like you were telling before about the the dollar and the 10 cents. Like I was just saying the quote because it does, but I didn't realize that that's what it spelled out.
Yeah, there you go.
I just heard the quote. No, and I'm assuming in that situation, assuming can get you killed or kill somebody else.
So here's an interesting one. It's called the status quo bias. The status quo bias is a description of our unconscious preference. We just have a tendency. Our mind has a tendency to favor what is going on at the moment, and starts to justify why we shouldn't change, why we shouldn't take a risk to do something different. It's like, hey, we've got this person on our team. I know they're not doing a great job, and it's causing us a lot of problems, and we've got a lot of complaints, but we don't want to rehire because that's different. We're just going to, at least we know how things are right now. And so, again, by understanding that such a bias exists, when it comes to decisions, you go, okay, are we keeping things the same because it's easier to, our mind just sort of gravitates that way? Or are we falling victim to the status quo bias? Or is this actually the right decision to make? Again, another just kind of think twice about it, which is good.
Well, Jake, you'll love this. We could make a decision that's not necessarily good because, that person, appears that way, or they have the status quo. So I'm going to make a decision, based on, because they have all the appearances of something, but that person really isn't. especially when it comes to online, social media and things. People are selling stuff and, promoting these fake lifestyles. Take pictures with rented cars, or, go film themselves in houses because they're giving that appearance, and people are like, oh, well, if they've got these pictures and things like that, they have to be, doing well. So I'm going to go buy. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I don't sell anything at all is because I don't want people thinking that I'm doing this to sell something. But there really is a lot of, especially on social media, it's like, all right, that person has to be happy because they're posting happy pictures.
100%. And that's actually called the halo effect. The halo effect describes our unconscious tendency to fill in the blanks. Again, it's a fill in the blanks thing, whereby, if I see something good about you, my brain has a tendency to assume that you're also good and competent in other areas of your life that I haven't assessed. So a job interview, halo effect can, really swing a hiring decision. Oh my goodness, I love the suit that they're wearing. Therefore, their Excel spreadsheet skills must be great. All right. Or I love the shoes on their feet. Therefore, they must have a lot of money in the bank. Or, I love the fact that there's a car, there's a Lambo, behind them when they're taking that shot. That must mean that they're crushing it in, as a serial entrepreneur or whatever. So can you identify with that? That's the halo effect.
No, it really is. And, it's a lot of times, like, some of these things aren't bad. They can be good. And that's why I tell people, as much time as somebody spends on getting dressed for the day, right? So say if I spend 30 minutes getting dressed for the day, or somebody, spends time putting their makeup on, however much time you spend on doing that to look good for the day, you need to be doing for your online profile as well. Always constantly making it look better, because we're coming into a day and age, whether we like it or whether we don't, that your online persona is more real than in real life.
Absolutely. That's so key to think about it in that way, isn't it? That people are making decisions based on, what I give them. So by understanding how the mind works, do yourself a favor, and work on your online profile, work on a good headshot, because people are making decisions unconsciously as well as consciously. The Horn effect is if you see something unfavorable about somebody when you meet them for the first time, that first impression then creates negative assumptions about the rest of everything. So if I see spinach in your teeth when you show up for a job interview, I've never met you before, I assume that you can't do Excel, and that you aren't competent or whatever. And isn't it interesting? Our minds think like that.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the fourth cognitive bias?
The forgetter. The forgetter is concerned with biases in how we remember things. Your memory is great, but it's not perfect. And actually, every time we, the process in which we store memories, form memories, store them, and then retrieve them, is flawed. And there are changes and adaptations to those memories all the time. And this has been shown in criminology studies, criminal psychology studies, in terms of how people remember a crime, and how that data can change over time. And these are reproducible findings in just human behavior. I'll tell you a couple of them because they're interesting. And this one's simple. Everyone gets this. It's called the Google effect. The Google effect, otherwise known as digital amnesia. And that is that we have the tendency to remember less of what we're reading online, even though we think it's going into our head, because unconsciously we know that it exists online and we can always go back to it. So, and sometimes you're studying online, but actually you're unconscious. Yeah, it's warring against you, and it's like, look, come on, dude, why even bother read this? Because you could just like look at it again, and that's a problem. If you're revising for an exam or try to read a report, it's on a PDF, and you just unconsciously think you go back to it, test your memory, it's not as good as it should be, So Google effect.
That's why I tell people I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, because a lot of people didn't get the information that they needed till later on in life, right? But I can go back. You've got Napoleon Hill, and you've got Jim Rohn, and you've got Tony Robbins. So everything that Tony Robbins, that took him 30 years to put together in one book, I can get that in the matter of a short period of time, because it's cleaner data. They put it all together for me. But just, one of the biggest things, and I think, telling people, maybe you'll be able to explain why this, I can look back and, somebody could ask me about somebody, like, tell me about so-and-so. And I'm like, well, I don't really like that person. And, not that I'm talking bad about anybody, but like, I don't like that person. Well, tell me why you don't like that person. I really don't remember. I don't remember what they said, or what they did, but I remember how they made me feel. And so I can remember the feeling, but I can't remember the exact action. And so why is that?
I mean, emotions are compelling. Emotions are, they move us. Emotions are what we feel. And so, we have a tendency to be able to remember, the anger, the surprise, the fear, the joy. There's a bias in this memory world called the peak end rule. So if I were to ask you, Jake, think back to a really wonderful holiday that you went on, and then just tell me one random memory from that holiday. Can you share?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I can look back and, I remember I don't remember how old I was, but I got a new bike.
Okay, cool. Was that that was probably a cool moment?
Yeah, it was. And as I look back, and it was because of, I think, that who I was going to feel like on that bike. It was it was a brand new. I can remember the bike. It was a brand new Mongoose. It was a popular bike, and it was black, and it looked cool. And I just remember, like, dang, how I felt like I was going to look while on it.
Yeah. And did you go on holiday for that, or was that during like a school break or something?
No, that was Christmas, like Christmas. So we call it vacation, you guys call holiday. So I said like holiday of that, but I can come up with a vacation holiday.
Well, go on then. Let's do that. Yeah, go tell me about a time where you went away.
4 years ago, and then went skiing up in Colorado with a group of friends.
And can you give me one random memory from that time away?
Just hot tubbing after you get off the slopes.
Okay, so this is a perfect example. It's called the peak end rule. Okay, so when we think back to, well, times in our life, our mind has a tendency to home in on 2 points on a memory, and that is the peak, which is the emotional high, the great moment. So that hot tub was amazing, or when I got the bike was amazing. And also what it was like to end, and how we got home, or the flight back, or when we said goodbye and things like that. And again, when we are aware that our mind has a tendency to work memories or sample from memories, then it just allows us to be a little bit more balanced about, this thing that I'm recalling, have I got that right? Am I just homing on parts of my memories? And by even understanding this, it really helps diffuse conflict between people. Have you ever seen a situation where, like, there's a mom and there's a kid, the kid's grown up, and then the mom's got a memory of the kid, and it's like, no, that wasn't me, that was Sam. It's like, no, it was definitely you that put those red shoes on and went running through the village. No, it wasn't, it was Sam. They're both absolutely convinced, right?
Yeah.
That their version is absolutely true. And so just by understanding that, hey, you know what, the way I remember it, this is it, and the way I remember it, this is how it was. That's okay. We have different memories of the same event, and that's okay. And then it just kind of cuts out some of those those moments. So yeah, our memories are fascinating, and yeah, we do remember emotions. We can remember emotions.
So with that being said, you've got those 4 biases. I believe that social media and alcohol and drugs and things are really designed to keep people in a pattern. As we live in a society, so we like to put people in groups. Hey, here's your job to do. Here's your job to do. Here's your job to do. As societies like to control certain groups of people, but keep them okay with their position, because there's just enough dopamine to keep them there. And so even when it comes to like social media, is if somebody can get all of the dopamine that they need, even if they're unhappy or whatever, it keeps them stuck in a cycle. Or drinking at night, like you had a bad day, and instead of taking the time to, say, what, I don't like this job, but I'm going to start a business at night, or I'm going to study and become better. I drink for that instant gratification, and then the next day repeats itself. And then you look back, and every day doesn't seem that different, but when you look back, your life is completely changed. If people are seeking the hedonia, and they can constantly get it from social media or from movies or from things, is if that's what their life pursuit is about, is they never really reach their full potential, or have the true knowing of themselves, is because there's enough out there to where it's like it's a system that keeps people constantly just happy enough. That's it, to where they don't feel like
Yeah.
they don't change because they can get those hits.
Yeah. Yeah. And why would you change? And there's the status
Why?
quo
Yeah. Why
bias.
would you change?
It's like, I'm okay right now. Jake, I don't know if you remember the story a few years ago about a high profile comet that went whizzing past our planet Earth. And in the core of that comet was trillions of dollars worth of platinum inside it. And the crying shame about this is that no one could hop onto that asteroid and drill it and mine it out. And so it became a waste. It just flew by, And I wonder if we're talking about the situation whereby sometimes we can get stuck. We're floated with treasure inside of us. There's a huge amount of value inside every one of us. And some of us go the cost and the expense of mining that out and discovering that treasure and that potential. And then some of us don't go there because it's difficult, it's painful, it's whatever, or no one showed them how or whatever. And so that then can feel like a waste of someone's potential. You and I have friends that, could totally change this world, but they don't believe it about themselves, or they haven't drilled in and discovered something about themselves or whatever. And yeah, I think there are things in life that hold us in a suspended, animated state, and it can be those things that keep us ticking over, like, and they're not bad, they're entertaining, but they just kind of keep us there in the status quo. And yeah, it's scrolling through my phone, or just passing time,
Yeah.
So,
no, I think I think it's incredible. So I think who's ever listening, tell me what's next. What do you have going on that you're working on, and then where people can find to know more about you.
Well, up until COVID, I majored as a live keynote speaker for large events, for corporate events, and a workshop trainer. And that was in the business world. But after COVID and the live thing isn't happening as much, I've transitioned into the online coaching space, and I'm developing some online courses. But the place to really find me would be in my new free Facebook group, my new coaching secrets group. It's facebook.com/groups/Dr. T Secrets, DRT Secrets. So that's the Facebook group. That's the Facebook group, and it's recent. It's just a few weeks old, and it's a great place to jump in and get some free high performance life coaching. We're talking about motivation, fulfillment, memory training, cognitive biases, the usual Dr. T high performance life coaching stuff. But it's a great place just to find community, like-minded people, trading ideas, swapping stories, that kind of stuff. And that's going on right now.
No, and I think it's that's great. And people do need to get in that group, just because of the simple fact of there's going to be other people there, reaffirming, the decision that they're making to become better. Just because that slight edge could make all the difference in the world. I mean, if if you're a sprinter, if you can run 1/10 second faster, that makes all the difference in the world. And so like extraordinary, right? It's just a little bit extra. We think that we've got to become these like superhuman beings. Like, no, just to become just a little bit better. So I know that I'm signing up to be, to do one-on-ones with you so that I can become better myself. So, anybody, should hop on that Facebook group and make that decision. So, hey, Dr. T, it was incredible having you on this podcast. I'm going to have you on again for sure. But I just feel like this is probably enough
Yeah.
content for right now to digest. And then we'll get you on again in the future. So it was great having you on here.
Thank you. Total pleasure, Jake. Thank you so much.
Be freezing good, wherever your ego is. Would be better for you if you were egoless. Would be better for you if you were egoless. Would be better for you if you were egoless. Get your ego out the way.